Um, so we're at a really good segment here, and actually, this is perfect time because I would like to shift now. We've sort of laid the groundwork. Pre-Diluvian, and then what took place post-Diluvian, and now we're getting into that endgame scenario. Um, I recently had a conversation with Timothy Alberino. We were discussing his book, Birthright, and inside there, it gives us the groundwork laid for these angelic beings that came and took wives of all whom they saw and desired, and then to them were born the men of renown, the Nephilim. And then, as you described it, and actually as Tim described it, you had ruling over those 10 nations within the Atlantean, I guess, umbrella. You had these Nephilim kings, and you had those fallen angels behind them that were ruling by proxy through these Nephilim kings. So I do believe we're going to see that same, as you put it, that same sort of research and that rebuilding of Atlantis here in the end time. And for a lot of people out there, um, there's a very who don't realize there's a very very heavy connection with the final great deception, which is going to push so many people over that edge of having to finally admit to themselves that, yeah, honestly, reality is sometimes a whole lot stranger than fiction. And it has to do with a UFO, an alien connection, or a extraterrestrial sort of connection. Um, and I'd love to sort of jump into that now, now that we've laid this groundwork down. Uh, and part of what I'd love to just pick your brain on is, so as these nations are coming back into prominence again, we see ourselves reaching those same sort of technological pinnacles that we once were able to attain to back in that Atlantean era. What does that great deception that sways the world into taking up arms against the coming Christ, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's not any one thing. It is a sizable propaganda, preparation, and deception that comes from every possible angle. If we think we're seeing propaganda and brainwashing today, we've seen nothing yet. And so some people will say flat earth is the great deception. Some people will say the alien mythos is the great deception. Some people say Antichrist is the great deception. And you can pick a menu of probably 100 different things. The thing is, it's all working together. But here's the thing. All of it has to go to make people believe that Jesus was not the Messiah, and Antichrist, who once was, will be again, right? The one, as described in Revelation 17. And so he is described, Antichrist, as not only the opposite of Christ, he's a replacement Christ. And he comes before Christ in that understanding of the definition. And they'll make a case that this person came before Jesus did. So look for an antediluvian, perhaps post-diluvian, but I think to make it a little bit more accurate, it would be an antediluvian dragon messiah. Could be an Atlas type figure or Orion, but they could pick somebody from after the flood as well, as long as they were here before Jesus came. And then he's going to come before Jesus does, before the ordained time in the end time. But he's got to be able to make everybody believe with his pedigree and his powers and his wisdom and his insights. And the book of Daniel tells us that he is going to receive insights that, and I cover this off, that are going to be very much Christ-like in terms of, when I look at what Jesus said in the four Gospels, it's like, that's what blew me away. Just this, I said, that this could not be a human. Well, it's going to be akin to that. And so he has to, they have to de-deify Jesus And then Antichrist has to fulfill all of the credentials. So, and you have to legitimize who the pantheon of gods are and all these other creatures are, which is part of that alien sort of mythos as well. And that monotheism went rogue from the root religion that was before the flood, Enochian mysticism, as I like to call it, that comes across the flood, restarts at Babel, which is the allegorical and etymological source word for Babylon, and the same religion Nimrod as an antichrist archetype type figure tried to impose. And who knows, Nimrod may be that individual, and that he became like a giant, and maybe he ended up in the pit prison like the terrible ones did. And he comes up out of the prison, and the one who kills the two witnesses, or it could be Azazel, as in whoever it is, he's going to play a significant role in the end time. And Antichrist is very much connected to them. And Antichrist in 2 Thessalonians is going to receive the power from Satan, as will the false prophet. And you might say that that's the same as the dragon that he receives his power from, but that dragon could be interpreted as a seraphim angel as well. So it could be Azazel, or an angel that comes up out of the pit prison. He is going to have this avatar relationship that we're being prepared for. An avatara is the god or the angel. The avatara is the one who receives it. Additional power or wisdom through coming in like a Holy Spirit, and the symbiotic relationship, that spirit enters into the human soul and body and spirit, which is already there, and adds power. And we know this is possible biblically because Satan entered into Judas to give him the courage to continue to betray Jesus. So we know that that is possible, and we know Satan is going to somehow provide that power, and maybe another angel as well, depending on how you want to understand the one who comes up out of the abyss and who the dragon is in Revelation 12. So we need to understand that he will need a false resurrection as well, which is why
Everything's a counterfeit.
He's a mortal head wound. Everything's a counterfeit. He needs a counterfeit Armageddon. Ultimately, has to have a counterfeit Armageddon. So that's why when you look at Revelation 9 and why you have to be, I think you have to be very disciplined to not leaving out inconvenient passages and not reimagining passages to fit your preconceived conclusion. You have this war that's an extension out of what comes up out of the abyss. It's the 200 million man war. And these creatures are a little bit different than what comes up out of the abyss. And I give two comparatives of each of those in two different locations in book 2 to show you who these creatures are that come out, and that this is a chimera army that is described in Joel 1 and 2. And that this is before the midpoint of the last 7 years. And it has to be because the one who comes up out of the abyss has to be there to kill the two witnesses. So that pit prison has to be open, right? And again has that relationship with Antichrist when he comes to power. So it's an essential part of Antichrist coming to power. And so it's an extension out of it, and it's located in Revelation 9 and not the Armageddon war that a lot of people like to say it has to be. Because it's a 200 million man army. I mean, it's got to be Armageddon is the sort of standard dogma. Trouble is, those creatures are the same creatures that are described in Joel 1 and 2. And the Armageddon war is in Joel 3. This is another war, and it's the largest army ever seen since creation or ever will be. It's going to be actually larger army than the Armageddon war. And it's the same war as Ezekiel 38 and 39. And of course, that happens before the second Exodus. So we know it's not Armageddon as well. It happens as you get that in Ezekiel 39, and you get the last days in Ezekiel 38 for that war. And strangely enough, these names Gog and Magog, they're giant names. And Gog doesn't have a lineage back in the Bible. Magog does. And I think one of the members of Japheth has his name changed to Magog after intermarrying with the giants. But Gog and Magog were giants before the flood. These were the offspring of Iapetus, the parent god of the sea before Poseidon took over. And Gog, and we have Gog of Magog, chief prince of Meshech, as they're described. And Gog, as you take that back to Hebrew and the Greek, both are identifying Gog as also an end time Antichrist type figure. And that's the same war. Right?
Interesting.
That you have 3 passages on the same war. And then at that time, as you move over to Daniel 11, all of this is covered off in great detail in book 2. Antichrist sees this overwhelming army as he's rising to power, destroyed from before him. And then he goes in for the abomination. And you get a similar accounting in the book of Luke, where just before the abomination, Antichrist is going to move his armies into Jerusalem. It's the same relevant passage. So he's going to take credit somehow, some way for the war. Now, does God save Israel in the Gog war? Or does he permit, as he might have permitted the angels to cause the flood? Because nothing happens unless God permits it. Even though he allows things to happen through free choice, but there's certain things that he doesn't permit if it's not going to permit all the names of the book of life to be fulfilled. But he's going to take credit for winning that war somehow and then crown himself as the Messiah at the abomination. And if the Anjou get their way, it's the King of Jerusalem title. So what's the great deception? Well, everything funnels into the rising Antichrist. So Babylon's the great deception. The end time empire is the great deception. All of the technology, all of the aliens, and they're wanting us to understand that monotheism went rogue at the time of the Israelite monarchy, and that Moses brought the religion of Heliopolis back with him. And so that cuts off Islam, Judaism, and Christianity at Moses, and they'll bring that through deceptions and lies back into the original pantheon through the mystical sections of each. Sufism within Islam, Kabbalism, and Ascenism, and Sabianism, and others within Judaism, and Gnostics within Christianity.
Wow.
And that's the great falling. That's the great apostasy. That's the great falling away. That's the offending, the scandalizo that Jesus is talking about when they're going to be slaying and killing us before the abomination. So you're going to have church member turning other church members in, brothers and sisters turning against each other. And this is part of the first fruits of Revelation 7. That the Revelation 6 first fruits are told to wait for. And it's going to be a different tribulation than the Great Tribulation. There's two.
It's going to be almost like a church-bound 1984 where people are reporting on each other. So yes. I have another question then. I'm with you there. Gog and Magog being giants originally. I just finished up doing. I'm currently studying through Koinonia House. .org. I'm on their bronze track right now, and I just finished up an Old Testament survey of the Bible with Chuck Missler, and he was addressing the Gog and Magog future invasion. And one of the things that he put forward was you had Gog as being an entity, and then the future Magog, not the one already existing, but the future one, not being just an entity, but being an entire either people group or an entire army, a movement, if you will. Where do you line up on that?
Well, these are countries in the alliance, and we also need to understand that this is as an extension out of the opening of the abyss prison. So who's in the abyss prison? The pit prison.
Sure.
Well, we know fallen angels are, but who else is there? Well, that's why Ezekiel 32 is so important. So in Ezekiel 32, another dual prophecy that works in conjunction with all the other dual prophecies, you have the terrible ones. Uh, and that's the Hebrew word erit or eritim. And these are mighty ones, as they're called, Gibborim, that are involved here. And there's another group as well. So you have these terrible ones that are in the sides of the pit prison who are talking to Pharaoh, another mighty Rephaim bloodline. And also you have the strong ones, which is the Hebrew word El, for the angels that are also in there talking. You have two different
Mhm.
groups. And it's the terrible ones that are in the sides of the pit prison. These are the ones who did horrible things on earth. And when they were killed, were sent directly to the pit prison, both before and after the flood. And so we go, as you move on into Ezekiel 32, you're going to get, people like Tubal and Meshach. Guess
Mhm.
who's in the Gog Alliance?
Elam and Assyria.
Um, yeah. And if you have everything released from the pit prison, that includes these disembodied spirits that are in there. And these are the
Mhm.
worst of the giants, like Gog. And again, after the flood, you also have giants named Gog as well, part of the Gyges or the Herculides kings, which is the Cretazens of the uh, offspring of Zeus and Alcmene to produce Hercules, that produces these Gyges kings in Assyria, Asia Minor, through parts of Greece. And yeah, these are the same tyrants that were Nephilim before the flood, as Nephilim's defined as, or Torwanos.
I think I'm putting it together now because one of Jesus's condemnations when he writes his letters to the churches is you tolerate that woman Jezebel, and we understand Jezebel in that context to be a spirit working within essentially those sons of perdition. That to me seems like then we have, like you said, we've got Magog, that spirit now, that disembodied spirit working through all those different entities in concert.
Yeah, well, and these disembodied spirits now, are they going to possess humans? Maybe as
Mm.
in Daniel 2, you could take that translation, but more than likely, they need an oikotarian. They need a soul and a body to interact physically in this world, or they got to possess somebody. But that's the angelic technology that's coming out. Clone bodies,
Mm.
sleeves,
All their carbon.
transhumanism, whatever different forms. And that these are not created for humans because our spirits sleep when we die and are
Ooh,
going back to heaven in sleep. So all of this technology is for the disembodied spirits. And now you look at these chimera type beings that are riding on horses in that Revelation 9 war. That's like this oikotarian created for all of these disembodied spirits.
so here's another question then. I think I'm like right neck and neck with you then. So then in Daniel 2, when it talks about where he says, I saw iron mixed with miry clay, and it says they'll mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave to one another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. So my understanding with and this is I'm going to touch on Timothy Alberino's book again, Birthright, where he talks like the last three chapters of his book really deal heavily with UFO abductions, and then this hybridization campaign that they are running, where they're creating these beings, but they're all sort of just floating in these tubes, like they're just sort of like dolls. I could see them having not just the appearance of human as they get closer and closer to looking more like us, but having the hardware necessary for those spirits coming out of the pit to have a husk to go right back into, like you said, an Oikotirion, and then be able to rejoin in that army
Yes.
with the
Yes.
beast.
Yeah. And now, yeah,
Whoa.
now consider what we said earlier when we talked about these 10 kings that rise before the last 7 years, or at the time, or consummated by Babylon at the start of the last 7 years.
I didn't think about
And that,
that.
yeah, and that when you look at that Gog war with that timing, and you look at some of the groups of nations that are in there, this is part of the 10 kings that are marching on Israel. And if you look at some of those players like Persia, for example, Persian are Indo-Aryans originally, and Persia settled into the Indo-Aryans from this Persian line settled in the same areas the Cadmonim and other people in Elam or Olamim as the ancient Aboriginal giants as well. But the Persians were the Achaemenian bloodline. As they took their genealogy back. But the Persians also settled in the Indus Valley. So you have India that would be included in Persia as it would be understood in ancient times as part of these Aryan people, right? And so now if you look at 10 kings, perhaps 5 on each toes where you've got them working together, but 2 alliances of 5 maybe working together and against each other. And you get one side that's not, or most of one side, all of that's not totally happy with the covenant that is agreed to in Daniel 9:27. And so you have, let's say, Meshech as Russia and its expanded bloodline empire. You have India. You have obviously Iran and Iraq and Persia as well. That would be in that whole group. You also have Beth Karma, which is sort of understood as Turkey. And you see them moving more towards Russia and China today. And Gomer is Germany, and they're relied, just as India is, on energy. You could see them moving with their Middle Europa type of empire into this 5 of the East. Now, they don't all have to be in the East, but it's just amazing how many of those members are like part of this new opposition to the European order. They've got their own banks, their own currency, their own cryptocurrency, their own credit cards. They're trading within their own dollars. They're setting up a rival system. China's not in on this Magog war. They're maybe the Sinim, as I described them in book 2, but they are involved in the Armageddon war. So China may not participate in that war, but you will have India. They're of the East. So I think you could reach that number, and you could have other nations that are part of that group that are also contributing. I mean, you also, got places in North Africa. So you have like an African alliance or a North African alliance of some sort, or a Middle Eastern alliance that seems to be part of that whole makeup as well. And these are all kind of natural haters of Israel who will receive protection from the world order.
Wow. And like, go figure the destruction and like rage and vehemence with which that destruction is going to be carried out is going to be so severe. Because if we essentially have a prison full of inmates that Christ himself went on down to when he was 3 days in the pit and proclaimed to them exactly what he did, gave them that proverbial middle finger and was like, I'm taking these keys of death back now. Y'all done stepped in it. The son of God is taking his seat next to daddy. Go figure that they would be chomping at the bit to get back on out, reanimated, and then just start laying siege to the cities of men. Like, go figure they would have that bent, because they've been in there now for thousands of years, just brooding over it all.
Well, yeah, and the ones before the flood would like to complete what they were trying to do.
Sure.
With the angelic technology, and all we've seen from the bloodlines and the beast empires is wars. They are the root of perpetual war. They can never, ever get along. In their belief system, there can only be one, just like in the Highlander movies and TV series. And that eventually there's only one dynastic family that's going to take over. And that's why there's war all the way through. I mean, they don't, they're using humans. They're trying to get, keep us pushed down and eventually want to destroy us. But They also have their rivals to worry about because they don't want to be subservient to these narcissistic, violent monsters because they know they're narcissistic, violent monsters.